when I moved to New York, I continued to the 10th grade, and my classmates were from different Caribbean countries, African countries. And that was a culture shock. Um, but I think what made it a decent transition, there were teachers who are Jamaican.
Welcome to the Immigrant Experience in America, an immigrant human library, where we amplify and humanize the experiences of immigrants in the United States and around the world. Listen in as we add another story to our immigrant human library.
Hi, friends. How are you doing? Thank you for joining us on another episode of the Immigrant Experience in America. Today, we have another great story for you. It's that of Kerry-Ann from Carry-On Friends podcast. She's the podcaster host of Carry-On Friends, and she has a media company called Breadfruit Media, and she does so very much with that. We would love to welcome her to our platform and to hear more about her Caribbean American experience. Welcome, Kerry-Ann.
Thanks, Simone, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. I'm looking forward to learning more. So give us a bit about Kerry-Ann and, what's your heritage and a bit about your background story there.
So I'm a Jamaican born. I moved to the U.S. Around the age of 14 with my mom and my three brothers, New York specifically. And it was quite a bit of an experience because I'd left Jamaica at the end of my 9th grade year. And then I finished high school here in the U.S. And I've been living here ever since. I mean, obviously traveling back and forth. One of the things about living in the New York area is that the Caribbean and Jamaican culture is very strong in the area. So it's not the same as Jamaica, but it's not a complete disconnect from culture just because of where it's situated and the Caribbean experience here. And in 2013, I launched Carry-On Friends because I realized that I was having conversation with my friends and they were all in different silos, but around the same thing. But what really drove me was my experience in the workplace at the time. I felt I needed mentorship and guidance. And it was very difficult to get that understanding, with someone who understood my cultural background, because the way I show up at work has a lot to do with my cultural heritage. And a lot of the misunderstanding that I was experiencing in the workplace also came from my cultural heritage. And so I started carryonfriends.com with that in mind, and among other things, and wanting to talk more about that Caribbean American experience, working, living, going through all areas of life. And the blog evolved to the podcast evolved into Breadfruit Media, and so on and so forth. And so we could get into that in a little bit.
Yes, you're doing great things with the Breadfruit Media. Podcast is doing well, so congratulations on that. Yes, I find that people in the New York area, when I come across them, they just seem to be so confident and rich in their culture. It doesn't matter whether it's from the Caribbean or anywhere else. I think there's plenty of people to go around where they, different enclaves where they can interact with people from the same culture. The food is available, probably lots of social events going on, and you're just around like a lot of people who you might be able to just use your regular talk and people get you. I was in the DC area for a while, and social pressures, assimilation pressures because of my job. I feel like sometimes my Yardie accent kind of disappear, but I'm still trying to hold on to it, and I still try to hold on. So tell us a bit about what life was like growing up in Jamaica for you for the 9 years you were there. You said, right? And 9 years you came here at 9?
No,
ninth grade. Ninth
yes,
grade. Forgive me.
Yes, well, into high school, having a social life. I mean, I grew up in Montego Bay, and for me, life was
No, Mobile. You're from Montego Bay. You're from the area. I call it. Everybody correct me when me say Montego Bay. I say Montego Bay, and
Well,
them say no, I'm Mobile. I'm
it's
Mobile.
Mobe. It's Mobe, but I don't know if my audience is aware. Your audience is aware of that abbreviation. So most Montegonians will say Mobe, or most people from Jamaica will just say them come from Bia, even shorten it even more. So I grew up in Mobe. I went to high school, and it's for me, life was fun. I even talked with my brother-in-law who's from Kingston, and the things that we take for granted, because in Kingston, you know they have a certain experience, whereas in Mobe, we have beaches, we have that experience. So there are certain things that I'm accustomed to by coming from Mobe. Seeing the beach was nothing. I drive past it every day. I walk by it every day. I could go on it. I went to church, high school, friends. It was really a tight-knit community back then as I knew it. But we also had rich experiences and exposure to other cultures, not only because we were like the tourism center of Jamaica, but also I felt that growing up in Jamaica, I got a very rich mix of other cultures, whether we learned that in school or in other areas, we did have that. And so it was bittersweet when I knew that I was leaving Jamaica to move to New York. Um, a lot of times people ask me, why did you come to America? I didn't have a choice. I was a teenager. My mom said, we're moving. We're moving. There's no
Yes, I get
pushback
it.
on it. So, but while I was there, I just had a really amazing time with my friends and, just growing up and with extended family. I come from a very large family. So I have so many stories and experiences with all the cousins. And there's always extended cousins, but we never say, oh, my second, third, fourth, none of that. It's
We
just
just
cousins
cousins.
and just keep moving.
It's true.
Uh,
It's true.
yeah, so for me, that was just a really fun experience for me. Of course, Jamaica is not always easy, and I mean, we when you're out of the home country, you look back at some experiences and see how well they shape you. So my husband and I would talk about primary school and how leaving primary school to go home, like there are certain survival skills that I learned, like we used to take after school evening lessons, we call them, like extra lessons. And if we saw that it was about to rain, because we could spot the rain was coming, we knew that evening lessons had to end really early, because as you know, when it rains in Jamaica, it's almost a
Of
flash
course.
flooding. Yeah.
Yes, of course.
And so you want to make sure that you're getting home at a certain time. You know you avoid walking certain paths, to go home. So if we normally took street A, we had to take a different route because the waters would be rushing on that end. So you want to bypass that to get home. And just really, little things that we took for granted, but as an adult, I can appreciate the survival skills that, we knew what to do and how young we were. I think that's the thing that I marvel at, how young we were navigating these scenarios. And I look at my kids now and I'm like, these kids can't manage. They would not be able to manage what we had to deal with or navigate at the age we were. So
It's
yeah.
true. It's so true. My sister and I said the same thing because they're so sheltered. And especially when you're living like the suburban areas, drive everywhere. We had to take public transportation. You're walking, you're
Absolutely.
navigating yourself among the public,
Mhm.
taking taxi, traveling miles to go to high school because after you pass common entrance, sometimes it's not close to home. You have to go to whatever high school you got placed in.
I
So
love that you said that, because I know we're in the same generation, because common entrance don't exist anymore. So when I took common entrance, fortunately, I went to a school within the Mobe area, Mount Alvernia High School. But I did have classmates that were traveling as far as Hanover and maybe parts of Westmoreland, and just getting up really early to come to high school. So, just looking back at that and just like, wow, yeah, the kids now, even if they weren't so sheltered, the terrain, the geography is different, right? So when the rain falls in certain parts of America, you're not worried about flash flooding and taking a taxi, to go home. It's just very different. The infrastructure is so different, even if they weren't sheltered. But you're right, the sheltering and the geography in the US and in Jamaica is just very different. And I'm sure a lot of that has changed, but it made for shaping me into being able to be observant, because we had to observe our surroundings, our environment, or and the other thing is, like I was saying, how much as a mom I now appreciate some of the things my mother had to deal with. So
Mm.
there was no cell phone. There was no, you're lucky if you pass a payphone, right? And when it was raining, and typically school gets out at a certain time. And I remember one incident in particular, it rained so much that we couldn't get home. It was very difficult to get a taxi to get home. And it was getting really dark. And my friend at the time, she had a brother who was friends with my brother. So all four of us, we were trying to walk home. And it
Mm.
was really dark. And I was just like, I can't imagine one of my kids now somewhere out there having to walk home from Manhattan to Brooklyn or wherever, don't have a cell phone to get in touch with them to see if they're all right, just praying that they are okay and get home safe. And that was really a moment of like, wow, not just to the tenacity of me, my brother, my friend, and her brother, but how much praying and everything that my mom and my grandmother, they had to do to make sure that we got home safe, because it didn't always end up that way for other people or other children going home
Yes,
when
it's
it's raining.
true. You're exposed to so much reality of life. Um, and it's funny because here in the US, I find that I try to shelter my daughter from so much exposure to too much online presence and everything that's being shared there, and making sure that you have some sort of control as to what she's taking in and how that's influencing her at the age she is, for example. And the security situation is different. I remember growing up. So you were in Mobay, I was in Westmoreland.
Mm.
And I remember our community, maybe 200 people, if that much, very small, but lots of like farm type of a setup. You could walk down the road. My grandmother would send us, our aunt would send us anywhere. You go up the street, nobody worrying whether you're coming back home. You would go out to the main road, take a taxi to the market, buy the how many grocery pounds or whatever they would send you to get, and come back home safely. But here it's different. There's so many stories. It's a different world here in the US. And so I understand the sense of being vigilant of your child, because we've had really serious happenings, right? To children. So it's really it's a different world,
Yeah.
but we get so much rich experience, I think, growing up in that environment. And I'm hoping that hasn't, I know it's changed since we're growing up and going to high school, right? But I hope for the most part that it has the culture of that, and children being safe continues to be there.
Yeah.
um yeah, but Mobay are a nice place. I would just, the airport, coming to the airport, or driving a top or bottom road, or going on the north coast
Oh,
or
so
the south coast.
so when we were walking home, so on a regular day to get home, you take top road, right? But like when it's raining, you take bottom road, because top road is just not a place where you even want to walk if you need it.
Yes, the
So we
water.
take bottom road, and yeah, you had to deal with, because if you're on bottom road, the water is splashing from the ocean, but it's the safer way to walk if we were walking home, which is back towards the airport. That's the direction that we would walk to walk home. So you know i i I love telling those experiences, because um the kids get to appreciate, and they get a different story about life. So yeah.
Yes, right. And then to be studying and being placed into high school and competing for the best high school, or even to get a government scholarship and things like that. I'm surprised to hear that the CXC they've changed it to something else, right? There's something similar. What is
So
the new system that they have out there now?
I'm not familiar. I know that common entrance is they've gone away with that. That much I know. CXC, I'm not sure if they've done away with CXC, but they've since gone through different levels. So when we were growing up, you could have taken common entrance in 5th grade, and if you met the age limit, and if you didn't take it in 5th grade, you would go to 6th grade. And I think they don't. I don't even know what's in place anymore. Just and I guess we're showing our age, but they continue to refine and update the process by which students get into high school. So it's very
Right.
interesting. Yeah.
And I think the goal, part of the change, was to make sure that everybody get placed into a decent high school. I
Mm.
think sometime in the past, people who scored at a certain threshold would get into the top schools or the better schools. And I remember some children being so disappointed because they either didn't pass, and they either had to continue at a certain school, and the whole perception in the community that, oh, them never passed common entrance, or they didn't get placed in a good high school. And so I'm not sure. It's kind of a mixed thing. I'm happy that those kids who would be left behind now have the opportunity to really make sure that they are moving on at a decent high school. Everybody gets placed. But then you wonder if that is going to affect the rigor and caliber of students that are putting out. I don't think so. I think Jamaica still has great training of their teachers from the Teachers College, and I mean, the U.S. is hiring from the country teachers all the time, nurses and teachers. So I mean, that speaks to all of that. But I hope that part of it hasn't changed.
I think
Oh, my husband just sent it's CSEC, Caribbean Secondary Examination Council. So not CXC no more, it's CSEC.
yeah.
And I think I've heard that.
I
I
think
think I've heard that.
I think testing for children wherever they are in the world, now having a different appreciation for it, is challenging because tests, there's some kids who will be good at taking tests and some won't. And as I reflect on life in primary school and high school, I can now see that was the challenge some students, some classmates had. And so even with the rigor of the Jamaican school system, there is still some formats of school that just doesn't work for every student. And we have the privilege to be in the group that maybe it did work for to a certain degree, but I think that's something that we always have to consider, that standardized testing or any form of testing doesn't work for every student. And even in the way that I look back at primary school, like my 4th grade class, I think it was a record. I had at least 60 or 70 students in my 4th grade class at primary school.
Mhm.
And it was all about which number you placed in the class. And my teacher at the time, loved her. We talk about her because she's a generational teacher. My husband's brother, who's much older, she was his teacher. I can't imagine her having to capture the attention of every single student in that class. She did the best she could, but I'm pretty sure there were some students in that class that would not be able to make it, or needed more learning attention from the teacher that she could not give because there were so many students in the class. So,
Yes.
when we look back, sometimes I want to make sure that we're not telling a very rosy picture, but when we look back, we can reflect and say, I can see how some students weren't considered bright, and it's because they were they learned differently. So
Right. It's true. That's true. Um, Differently abled, as people would like to describe these days. So there's
mhm.
technical schools. So that we know we had the technical high schools, and there's heart programs and for other people. But yeah, I think the country does well. I think my experience studying and growing up and finishing high school in Jamaica did me very well. And I say that all the time. I think our teachers poured so much into us, and to consider the distance that all of us, well, I didn't have to go too far, right? But there's a lot of people who are traveling I went to high school in Kingston, and they were coming from like Bull Bay, St. Thomas, like far places, you know. And they would be getting home late and still get up and come to school every day. I mean, the type of dedication for that type of at that age for you to have and still show up coming from so far. I think, you know, it matures you and really gives you a light into the real world. And of course, some people may not have feared in that type of system and probably fell through the cracks because there weren't enough capacity to catch everybody, right? It happens. It's a small island, so it's not a perfect system for sure.
Right.
So, all right. So you finished high school and then you came to New York. You've been in New York ever since. What was that experience like?
So I didn't finish high school in Jamaica. I continued high school here in Brooklyn, and that was a very different experience. So we live on an island, and you know, you don't meet other people from other islands typically until you get to UE. And when I moved to New York, I continued to the 10th grade, and my classmates were from different Caribbean countries, you know, African countries. And that was a culture shock. But I think what made it a decent transition, there were teachers who are Jamaican. And so when they recognized that I was in the school, they quickly said, listen, don't come here and farm fool yourself. Right. And so quickly, you know, I knew that there were teachers looking out for me, whether they were from the Caribbean or otherwise. You're a good student. The teachers are going to make sure that you stayed focused, and you went through school, you passed your tests, and you know, where you get support, you get support. So it was a very good experience for me to be exposed to other Caribbean students, because I wouldn't have had that exposure until we got to the University of the West Indies. And because of that, there was just, I just never felt like, you know, other than being physically in Jamaica, I didn't feel that homesickness as much. The homesickness I felt was towards the family I left behind, but not necessarily missing the experience of the culture, whether it's the food or the music. It was on time, you know.
It's New York. You're
Yes,
New
New
York.
York. It was just like, hey, this is what was happening. So it was a really good experience to be in school and walking down the hallways and, you know, people talking. I think the one shock that I had was, you know, you grew up in the Caribbean and you go to high school, particularly the high school, you know, you're supposed to speak to the teacher in standard English. You can't speak patois to the teacher. And so coming here to high school and the students, I said, well, go on, Mr. Miller. And Mr. Miller said, well, go on. And that was just very different versus, you know, hello, Mr. Miller. You know, just the behavior in school is very different. So, you know, in Jamaica, when a teacher enters the room, you stand up, you say good morning. When they're leaving, you stand up. All of these things, all of that is diminished, you know, when you come to school here. So
I even sometimes, sorry to cut you, sometimes them don't even greet you because that was a big thing. Like,
yeah,
just
they just
good
walk in.
morning.
Yes.
I used to say good morning and nobody respond. Or no good morning. Everybody just pass the teacher and go sit down, and the teacher is looking down on something, just doing their thing, and everybody just a walk in. No greetings, no nothing. It's a different
It's very
kind
different.
of a setting.
Yeah, it was very different adjusting to like the culture and the respect towards the teacher the culture that I was coming from versus what happens in a New York City public high school. And but outside of that, it was a really enriching experience for me.
Good to hear. Good to hear. How the next phase of life then? You come to Brooklyn, you finish high school, it was a positive experience. You're building relationships. There's lots of people for you to form those relationships. So that sounded like it was a very positive experience for you in the first few years. So then you're transitioning into work or maybe going off to college. Were there challenges in kind of navigating some of that?
Yeah. So college was also a very different experience. Again, the culture shock, because by the time I started college, I was only 2 or 3 years into the country. So still very much adapting. So like there's some college experiences that I didn't really resonate with. So like the drinking and all of that, that was still not something that culturally
Same.
was something that, it was just like, okay, you know, you know, even the way we dress, right? So kids would just get up and just dress in, crush up clothes, go to class and all of these things. And, the thought of doing that, even though my mother or my grandmother wasn't there, the thought of doing that and was just not something that I could entertain, because it was just not something culturally that was okay. You need to iron your clothes and you need to look decent going to classes. So those are some of the challenges. Again, I think the more apparent things about culture kind of came when I went to work, because now, as with each stage, so the school in Brooklyn is in a predominantly Caribbean neighborhood. It's in East Flatbush, or Flatbush at the border. So they're mostly Black Caribbean kids there. So there's not much of an adjustment. Even if the teachers are white, there's not much of an adjustment. You go to college, it's still within the state of New York. Kids from New York City are in. So there's some adjustment, but not a lot. I think it was when I started going to work where it's more like, okay, here is a bigger adjustment. I would say certain words and people are like, what are you saying? And I did a very good job of not speaking with a Jamaican accent or doing anything. And it wasn't until, like, if someone called me at work, someone would be like, hey, I heard an accent. Where are you from? And I would say it, but it wasn't like something I advertised. It was just
Yes.
something that if you knew, you knew, but it wasn't something I walked around and say, I'm a Jamaican and just walking around, right? It was just something people happen upon. Um, it that even culturally, it wasn't a challenge because, I remember there was a conversation where I worked in a law firm and, one partner told another partner that, hey, Kerry-Ann is she's a good worker. And so that got me through a huge part of my career where I was known as a hard worker, did my, delivered top quality work product and just kept going. The most that would be a feedback is like, oh, she doesn't really hang out much, after work, which again,
Same thing over here. So all of I mean, we're raised among family. How big is your family? You said your family's being. I had like dad one of 11, mom one of 12. So you can imagine a whole heap of cousins and community and thing like that.
Absolutely. Same thing. So my grandmother, so we grew up in a house, multi-generational. So she was one of 10. My grandfather, that's my mother's father, he's one of how many, like, so, and then my father's side, it's the same thing. So really big family, extended families, and cousins living, next door, across the road, down the road, around. So there's just always family around, right? And what happens in the community is that you have people who've known you from your bond, and they become aunties, because they're part of the village that's raising you, right?
Yes,
And your
true.
kid, you're friends with their kids, you go to church, they call each other, you walk past the road, grab that one. So it's really an extended family. And I think the biggest change also moving to America was losing some of that, because it's very different. You're getting to know your neighbors, if you trust the neighbors, and so that was something that was also lost. But fortunately, I lived in a 2-family home with family upstairs, so I had some of that, but not to the extent that I had growing up in Jamaica. So the biggest adjustment I would say would be at work, navigating, I think around 2009, maybe 2011, 12 is where I've noticed the biggest shift, where there was a generational change, where the older generation, they were just about just get the work done. The younger generation was coming in. They wanted to be a little bit more social. They wanted to do a lot more things. And I've spent so much of my career at that point building my career and reputation on working, doing good work, and being recognized for that. Whereas this newer generation, they wanted to hang out, and everything was based on how friendly you are, in my opinion. At least that was my experience in one particular company. And I also wanted to grow, and it was very difficult to figure out what was next for me from a career perspective, because I really didn't have anyone who understood me, and also were open to understand the cultural context that I was operating in. Yes, I'm in America. Yes, I'm in New York. But there's this other aspect of my identity that's really a driver. And as I'm here in 2025, looking back at that, I didn't realize, I know I said that to you, but I didn't realize how much my culture was impacting my work habits, my work performance, so I don't even know if I could have articulated it back then. And I think that's what it was. I could not articulate that. I need someone who understood who I was as a Caribbean, a Jamaican woman, and how that shapes the lens and how I bring myself to work. So that was the biggest adjustment.
Yeah, I had the same thing because I couldn't get comfortable with the happy hour thing often after work. And it was very frequent. And I remember going off to my first degree or undergrad, we say first degree in Jamaica. And I was a resident assistant and in the freshman dorm. And these are kids fresh out of high school coming in for the first year. Within a week, the whole front of the building will be lined up with people smoking, going out to drinking almost several nights a week. And I just didn't understand that culture. I mean, I was always around kids in high school. I did all my high school in Jamaica, right? And so I was around people who were serious about studying and competing, and CXC had come up and preparing and who's going to be first in the class and things like that. That was our worry. Now I have to grapple with am I coming out to the happy hour? But I have work after class. And then I come home after work and I have to get something to eat and I have homework to do for tomorrow. So it was just a different world for me. It was so shocking because everybody just seemed to, it was about fun. And today I look back and I say, maybe should I have given myself a little bit more breathing room to have a little bit more fun? But I wanted to do well and I had things to do. So there was really no time to prioritize things like that. I think it was my senior year in undergrad when I started hanging out with some friends, some college friends, and started going salsa dancing and things like that. But otherwise, I was just so focused on doing what I needed to do. And I just couldn't understand the different mindset of the kids that I was around. Yeah, that was interesting for me.
Yeah.
Join us again next time for part 2 of this episode. We thank our listeners around the world and we appreciate your continued support as we build our human library. Please remember to give us a 5-star review, subscribe, and share with your friends, family, and circle of influence.